Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I have done a couple of videos this year where I look at the best books or authors of a certain category and see how many of them I have read and which ones I maybe should add to my TBR. I did the best Irish authors in honor of St. Patrick's Day. I did the best Asian American authors for AAPI Heritage Month. I did the best Australian authors for Aussie April, and I did the best LGBTQ novels for Pride Month. I will link all of those videos down below if you would like to check them out. I am going to do one today about the 100 best young adult books of all time, which is an article that Time Magazine put out last week. And I already looked at it, so this video is going to be different from the other ones. I try to give myself room to react live or as close to live as I can when I do these videos, but I didn't know I was going to do it. I looked at the list and then about 75% of the way through got the idea that it would make a great video for one of these formats. So I've already seen all of the books on the list, and I've already looked a little more closely at some of the ones that were on the list that were unfamiliar to me. There are a lot of books on this list that are unfamiliar to me. So rather than just rattle off 100 books and authors, especially when a chunk of them are unfamiliar to me, I'm going to do highlights as we go through this video and talk about ones that I am familiar with, I have read, some that I own, some that are on my TBR, ones that are points of interest for me, and things like that. But I will link the entire list in the description box down below. If you would like to check it out in full, please do so. So if you see something on the list that you like that I didn't mention, please let me know about it, because if I didn't mention it, the odds are I was unfamiliar with it, and I don't want to make this a video that's like an hour long just to get through the whole list. And I am locked out of any additional articles from Time Magazine, so I can't click through to the longer descriptions of the books. And for the sake of time, both yours watching this video and mine in making it, I don't want to spend a lot of time toggling between tabs to get more information about certain books. So again, highlights. That's all I'm going to do. I will say one reason I wanted to do this video is that I feel like I am not a specifically young adult booktuber. So I fall a little bit more into, I guess you would call it, the literary fiction category. I hate that term so much because it makes it sound like it's superior, and I don't think it is. I occasionally get comments that deride young adult literature, and I actually am a big proponent of young adult literature. I don't read it all the time. I have read more of it this year than I have in previous years, but it's a great area, and it can be very formative to your experience of the world if you read these books as a young adult yourself, and I think they can be really fun to revisit. I love that the young adult market is so diverse and inclusive. I think you can find a lot of really great books in there that hit all of those boxes and will expand your worldview and teach you about things, and that is one of the things I love about reading. So this is sort of a way to respect the young adult market, and I like that there is a mix of classic books that people might not necessarily think of as young adult books, but which do technically fit the brief, and I think that challenges the perception of what young adult is, and I really enjoyed that. So I'm already 4 minutes into this video, and I haven't gotten to a single book. So let's get started. The first one on the list is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and I have a copy of this book, and I have read this book. I did a buddy read with Britta Bowler. Unfortunately, the title is Gold on Pale Blue, so you can't read it, but it's a very pretty edition of this book. This is something that I refused to read when I was a kid because it felt like it was for girls. And even though my sister was a fan, I watched the movie and loved the movie, I felt like I shouldn't read it or didn't want to read it because of that, so I never got around to it. But I did read it as an adult, and I'm really glad that I did. I think it is a good example of something that was designed for a younger audience, but which adults can equally read and enjoy, because especially in the first half, the chapters are set up like moral lessons for the March sisters. They experience a sort of moral conundrum, or they do something selfish, and by the end of the chapter, they have learned a valuable life lesson. And yet it still works if you read it as an adult. So I think it definitely deserves a spot on this list. The next one is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This was in a similar spot for me because I think my sister watched the Anne of Green Gables movies, and I think, if I remember right, I found Anne annoying. Maybe that's because I was a child. Maybe I would think differently if I read the books now. But that's why I never read them as a kid, also because it felt very marketed toward girls. And even though I did things that were stereotypically girly, like I played with Barbies and all of that stuff, I occasionally fell into the trap of thinking, well, that's for girls, it's not for me. And Anne of Green Gables never recovered from that. Maybe because we saw the movies and I thought Anne was annoying as a kid. I don't know if I would think that now. I know it's a wildly popular series that a lot of people love. So please let me know in the comment section down below if you think it would be worth a revisit, or if I'm wrong about that. Just let me know. The next one on the list is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. I have an edition of that has another book by Betty Smith in it. It's Maggie Now. This is something that I don't think a lot of people think of as a YA book, and that's why I mentioned that this list sort of challenges your perception of what a young adult novel can be. And at first, even I was like, I don't think that's a young adult book. It seems much more like an adult fiction thing, which kind of takes it into the realm of thinking that it's too serious to be young adult. And then I thought about it and realized A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was assigned summer reading for local high schools when I was working at Borders, which kind of by definition makes it a young adult book. It is something that I have wanted to read for a very long time, but I did not have to read it in high school. And I've been trying to catch up to it because of that, and I haven't gotten around to it. But I have a feeling when I do, I will really love it. The next one is The Diary of Anne Frank. I believe I read excerpts of her diary in junior high. I feel like I remember my English teacher had photocopied sections of it and passed them out to us to read, but we didn't actually read the diary. And then when I was in my freshman year of high school, I had moved and we read the play, The Diary of Anne Frank, but we didn't actually read her diary. So maybe this is something I should circle back to, because it feels like I'm familiar with the story. The story feels very well known, but I still think the diary itself would be worth experiencing. By the way, I just realized Guinness is asleep in this chair, so if you get bored of me talking, there's napping puppy action happening right over here. Just a little added bonus for you. The next book on the list is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I've talked about this book a fair amount, and to me it is a great example of a young adult book, even though I feel like a lot of people would tend to think of it as a regular fiction book and not a young adult book. I read this when I was 16. It was not assigned to me in school. I read it on my own. I purchased a copy from a Crown Books. I'm dating myself, but yes, I purchased, or maybe even a Super Crown. Remember those? And I read it and I loved it. It felt to me like it defined my experience of the world and felt like a very true book and a true representation of how the world worked. Now I'm older and I realize that Holden was kind of an idiot. He didn't actually know what he was talking about. But when I read it as a teenager, I identified with him very deeply and profoundly. And because of that, it probably always will be my favorite novel. I also recognize that this is something that really is only so relatable and identifiable because Holden is a white male in the United States. I am a white male in the United States, so I can relate to him in a way that other people wouldn't necessarily. And when I thought that his experience of the world was true for everyone, that was probably ignorance on my part, but I still would say it's a great book. It is still something that is very deeply meaningful to me, and I would say it deserves a place on the list. The next one is The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Now, this one, I feel like I have a little bit of a quibble with. I read it on my own in high school. I had very specific English classes that didn't cover a lot of the things that most people read when you're in high school. So I didn't read The Catcher in the Rye. I didn't read Lord of the Flies in high school. I read both of those on my own. And I think I liked Lord of the Flies when I read it, but I read it again for a college course. And that's when I really liked it and got a lot out of it. So I feel like I got more out of Lord of the Flies as an adult than I did as a teenager. My experience is not universal. There are probably a lot of teenagers who do get a lot out of Lord of the Flies, but that is not the case for me. So I'm tempted to say that Lord of the Flies would be more of an adult book than a young adult book, but I'd be curious if you agree or disagree about that. The next one is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is something I read twice in high school, then was assigned again in a college course, and then I chose to read again for a different college course and write a paper about it. So I read To Kill a Mockingbird 4 different times for school, and I read it at least 2 other times for pleasure. I really like it. I think this one, unlike Lord of the Flies, definitely fits as a young adult book because I got a lot out of it the first time that I read it. But when I read it again, heading into adulthood and then solidly in adulthood, I got additional layers out of it that I didn't notice or didn't appreciate as much the first time around. So this is a book that I feel like you can revisit at any age of your life and you'll get something different out of. It's a fantastic book. I'm a big, big fan of To Kill a Mockingbird. For the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler is something that I read in 5th grade. I was assigned to read it in school. So part of me almost wants to question the young adult status of that book just for that. It seems like it could be an intermediate reader, but I don't really want to quibble with that too much because people who are teenagers can read intermediate level books when they are a teenager. You can read intermediate or young adult books as an adult. The age itself doesn't really matter, but I guess part of me does question if it's an intermediate book or a YA book. It's a great book, and I'm glad that E.L. Konigsburg has a spot on this list. I remember loving From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler, so I can't really argue with it being on the list, but part of me does question it a little bit. Ursula K. Guin is on here for A Wizard of Earthsea. I have never read one of her books. I had an aborted attempt to read one of her books last year, and I didn't finish it, and I feel like I need to get back to her, by the way. I want to make sure I mention that one and call it out because she is an author I need to revisit. I can't say anything about whether or not she would be a YA author because I just haven't read enough of her books. I'll Get There, It Better Be Worth the Trip by John Donovan was a book I had absolutely not heard of at all until this list, and I looked at it a little further, and it is described as one of the first LGBTQ YA novels. Now, the YA genre has come to be very diverse and accepting, but this is sort of a seminal book in that journey, and the fact that it is a 1969 book that addressed that topic makes me extremely interested in reading it, and I had never heard of it before. So I'm grateful to this list for putting that in front of me because I will absolutely be looking for a copy of it and reading it at some point, who knows when. I do want to mention Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume because it's on this list and I haven't read it. I read a lot of Judy Blume books, but I didn't read that one. And the reason for that is pretty simple. It felt like it was not for me because the part of the plot of that book that everybody talks about, and I'm sure you're familiar with, it's the reason that it is frequently banned from schools and libraries, made it feel like a book that was not for me. So I never read it. And if that's wrong, please let me know in the comment section down below. Forever by Judy Blume is also on this list, and it is also one that I did not read. I think that one also felt like it was specifically marketed toward girls, and that made it elude me, even though I read a lot of Judy Blume books. So again, let me know in the comment section down below if that is something I should revisit on both of those titles. Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt is something I read in my 20s, and it had really been built up to me because several people told me it was their favorite book of all time as I was working at Borders, and I had a lot of expectations, and it's a really slim book. And I guess I expected a lot of really thematic material and sort of heavy ideas to be happening in it, and it's actually a very subtle book. Maybe that's why it felt underwhelming. And maybe I would be more open to such a subtle book at this point in my life. So I feel like I should revisit it. It's a really tiny book, so it probably wouldn't take a lot of time to read. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor was frequently assigned summer reading when I was working at Borders, and I never got around to reading it, but it's something that I had a lot of conversations with people about and have always meant to read, but I didn't get around to it at the time. So A Swiftly Tilting Planet by Madeleine L'Engle is on the list. I read A Wrinkle in Time in 5th grade. It was assigned reading along with From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler. And I loved it, and I always wanted to read the rest of the books in this series, and I never got around to it. To this day, I have never read any of the other books in this series. And at this point, it feels like I would have to reread A Wrinkle in Time and get reacquainted with the series, so I don't know if I would get around to it. But let me know in the comment section down below. It's interesting to me that this is a circumstance where they took a later book in the series and not the first one. So let me know what you think if you have read the whole series. The Weston Game by Ellen Raskin is on the list, and I know I read it. I don't remember much about it. And Homecoming by Cynthia Voigt, I do want to mention quickly because as a point of interest, I know I borrowed a Cynthia Voigt book from the library somewhere around junior high, and I didn't get to read it. It was just sitting around, and then my mother made me return it to the library. And because I don't have any additional pages to read on Time Magazine's website, I can't flip through to see what the book is about. But I'm pretty sure that's the one, and I just never got around to reading it. Next, there are two books that I read and fully don't remember. The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros and The Giver by Lois Lowry. I didn't read either one of them in school. I read them on my own somewhere around the time I was anywhere from 18 to 21. Don't remember either one. Feel like both of them are prime topics for a reread, so I will probably be looking at that at some point. Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson, I've heard a lot of really great things about. I've never read it. It feels like because it's a difficult subject matter, I always put it off. And I should probably get over that and just force myself to do it at some point. Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli is a book on this list. I have a weird irritation with that book because it was always on summer reading lists, like a suggested, not required, for one of the local schools. And because it doesn't say the name of the book or the author, employees at Borders were constantly coming to me and saying, this book's not on the display. And I'd be like, no, it's on there. Here it is. It just doesn't have the title. Weird thing to be irritated at a book for. Very specific for those circumstances, but what are you going to do? Another one on the list is Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. I am really glad that this is on the list. This is a graphic memoir about her coming of age in Iran at the time of the revolution. At the time I read this, I described it as a sort of To Kill a Mockingbird-esque story because you have this coming of age story where you have an innocent child involved in a lot of child things and a lot of really heavy things going on around them, and they slowly become aware of all of the complicating factors of the world around them. The similarity really ends there, but I would say absolutely this book deserves to be there. I would say check out the sequel as well. It's fantastic. Elsewhere by Gabrielle Zevin is on this list. I hated that book when I read it. I wrote a really mean review of it at the time that I read it, and I think Gabrielle Zevin may have commented on it because I remember getting a notification on Goodreads that said Gabrielle Zevin commented on your review, but when I clicked on it to see what the comment was, there was no comment. So clearly she commented and then deleted, assuming it was actually her. So who knows what she would have said. It was not a nice review, so probably nothing good, but just a funny little story about that. The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak is on the list. Fantastic book. This was something that I used to point to regularly when people would say, oh, but YA isn't serious literature. It's not very deep. No, this is a serious, good book, I would say. American Born Chinese by Jean Lewin Yang is something that has been on my radar and I never got around to. And I think Doris from Aldi Books mentioned it sometime last year and got it back on my radar. And I've been meaning to either pick up a copy or get it from the library, and I haven't gotten around to doing that yet. So that is something I would absolutely like to check out. The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan is on here, and that's another one. I feel like mostly people who were in the intermediate level would come to Borders and pick that up when I worked there. And it was even shelved in the intermediate section, I'm pretty sure. But again, I'm quibbling. I've never read any of those books. I've never read a Rick Riordan book, so maybe it deserves to be here. Let me know if you've read it in the comment section down below. The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins is on the list. I have read all of the books in that series, the 3 in the original trilogy, as well as the prequel, and I enjoyed the original trilogy. The prequel I have some quibbles with. There are things about it I didn't like, but there are also things about it that I thought were really interesting. So that's a bit of a mixed bag. And it's a kind of a moot point because the only one they put on there is The Hunger Games. They didn't put any of the sequels, but I read the whole trilogy and really liked it. It does a lot of smart, different things. It's a little darker than a lot of YA books, which may not be a fair comparison, but there you go. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe is on this list. I love that book. My friend Jessica, who is a young adult librarian, recommended it to me and I've absolutely loved it. I recommended it to my husband, who started to read it and wasn't really into it, so he didn't finish. And then just this year, he listened to it on audio, fell in love with it, and now we are both really looking forward to the sequel, which is published later this year. Fantastic book. Every Day by David Levithan is on the list. I have read other books by David Levithan, but even though I have a copy of this one, I haven't gotten around to it yet, so I should probably give that a try, because again, I've tried at least one David Levithan book and liked it, so that seems like it would be one that I would probably enjoy. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jesse Andrews is on this list, and I did not know that was a book until this list. I knew it was a movie that I haven't seen, but didn't know it was a book. And speaking of dying teenagers, The Fault in Our Stars by John Green is on this list. I read that book and hated it. I really didn't like it, and I know that's not a popular opinion. I am very much in the minority, and I know I wrote a review about all of the things that I found irritating about it, and John Green actually responded to me on Twitter, and I believe he was really nice. He just kind of said, I respect your opinion and all of the points that you make about the book, something like that. So he was very classy about a review that did not like his book at all. 2 books in the March series are on the list, March Book 1, and I believe Volume 2 is the other one. They have them separated into different parts of the list, and I don't know why that would be. But those graphic memoirs of John Lewis's time in the Civil Rights Movement are fantastic. So if you haven't read them, please check them out. I really like them. There are a bunch of Jacqueline Woodson books on here, but I've only read one of her books, and it's not any of the ones on the list. So I need to do better about that one, by the way. I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson is on there. This is something that has been on my radar that I've owned a copy of for a while now, and it's perpetually on my TBR, and I perpetually don't get to it. And I feel like every time I mention it on my channel, people immediately comment, you need to get around to reading that book. And I haven't done it. I'm a failure. I fail at life, just in general. So I'm sorry, and I will get to it at some point. I know it's good. I know I will probably like it, but I haven't gotten to it yet. Simon versus the Homo Sapien Agenda is on the list. This is by Becky Albertalli. I had desperately wanted to read this book when I got it, and then just for whatever reason, never got around to it. And then the movie came out, and I saw the movie, and that actually decreased the urgency because I felt like I was familiar with the story at that point. And then I started reading a different book that Becky Albertalli co-wrote with a different author, and I really didn't like it. So this kind of dropped off my radar completely, even though I still have a copy. So maybe I need to get over that and give this one a try. Let me know in the comment section down below if I should revisit this, because it did sound like a really cute premise, and the movie was kind of cute. And I know the movie took some different directions from the book, or at least I've heard that. So it could still be worth a read. I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica L. Sanchez is a book that has been on my radar. I just don't have a copy of, haven't gotten from the library, so I want to get to that one. It is on my TBR. Don't know when I will get to it, but it is something I am very much interested in. The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas is on the list. I did read that book. I got it from the library. I haven't read any of Angie Thomas's other books, and I didn't see the movie, but The Hate You Give was a good book and a smart book. I really liked that that book also really challenged your perceptions and the way in which media narratives have fed the way you think about people who are involved in officer-involved shootings like the one at the center of The Hate You Give. Angie Thomas is pretty unapologetic about having her characters make mistakes. Maybe they do bad things, but she kind of asks you to understand why they might make those decisions, and then pokes you even further to say, but does that justify what happens to them all too frequently? And I thought that was a really interesting book from that perspective as well, as a white person who read it. We Are Okay by Nina LaCour is on the list. That is something that has been on my TBR. I believe I have the audio saved on Scribd, so I see it every time I'm scrolling through trying to pick my next read, and there are always just other priorities that are a little bit above it. So I would like to get to it at some point. I've heard a lot of really good things, but haven't gotten to it yet. When Dimple Met Rishi by Sandhya Menon is on the list. I've heard really good things about it. That's a pretty recent book, so I'm a little surprised it made the list, but here we are. Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi is on the list. I really wanted to like that book, and when I read it, I only made it a third of the way in, and it wasn't because of the quality of the book. It wasn't what the book is doing. It's just because I'm at a point right now where I'm not into that kind of story where you have a sort of magical chosen child who is going to save the universe, and I just wasn't in the mindset for it. So I like that the book is doing a spin on that and using African folklore to put a spin on that. I think that's great. It just wasn't a subgenre that I was interested in exploring at that time. The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo is on my TBR. I really want to get to it, just haven't gotten around to it yet. Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazemian is actually the audio I am going to be listening to next. This is something that was recommended to me by Chelsea from Montana Book Company. It is a Stonewall Honor book, as is I'll Give You the Sun, and I've had good luck with Stonewall Honor books in the past. I'm really, really, really excited to get into this one, and I will probably be talking about it more in my Friday Reads video for this week. I haven't started it yet. Next are two books that are on my TBR, Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. I haven't read anything by Akwaeke Emezi yet, and I really need to fix that. And actually, I was wrong. The next one is not on my TBR. It's With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. The cover looked like a different book, and it's not that book. I apologize. The Black Flamingo is something I read on audio last year. I enjoyed it, didn't love it, but I really enjoyed it. And it's the type of book that I love exists in the YA market right now. And it's why I get kind of enthusiastic about these situations. The next one is Felix Ever After by Case and Callender. This is actually the book that I thought the Elizabeth Acevedo was. I'm sorry, but Felix Ever After is the one that is on my TBR, and I believe I have the audio of this saved on Scribd as well, and I'm really looking forward to it. Stamped by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi is one that I've heard of. I feel like I'd be more likely to read the adult version of that though, so I probably wouldn't get to it. The last one that I will mention is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson, because I read that book just this past year recently on audio, and I enjoyed it. That is this type of book that I really love that it exists now. I wish they had existed when I was a kid. It might be a little less serious than some of the other books on the list, especially when you compare the fact that like To Kill a Mockingbird or A Tree Grows in Brooklyn is on the list. It might not seem like it would match that. It's almost like a rom-com, but I really enjoyed it. It has multiple layers of meaning in it, and while it is also entertaining, it still has a lot of substance to it, and I would recommend it based on that. So those are the ones that I'm going to talk about. Again, I will link the full list in the description box down below. Feel free to check it out. And Jamie is about to start barking and losing her head, so I'm going to take that as my cue to go. But please check out the full list if you have a moment, and let me know if one of the books I did not discuss is something that would be worth checking out, because odds are I skipped it because I was unfamiliar with it. I am not exclusively a YA reader, so I'm not really super familiar with a lot of the books that are in that market, but I did want to do this video, and if you have made it to this point, thank you. Your time is really appreciated, and as always, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.